Number 9. Dimitrios Shipwreck. Just miles from the Greek town of Githeo, there's a rusting cargo ship sitting along the beach at Valtaki. Built in Denmark in 1950, the 220-foot-long vessel is known as the Dimitrios. There's some conflicting stories about how it ended up abandoned along the shoreline. One rumor claims that the ship was used for smuggling cigarettes between Turkey and Italy. Authorities supposedly seized it at Githeo and then deliberately released it from the port as if it wasn't their problem. Someone then allegedly set the vessel ablaze to conceal evidence of its participation in the illicit cigarette trade. According to another more vague story, the Dimitrios is a ghost ship of unknown origin. Spooky. Former honorary chief of the Hellenic Coast Guard, Vice Admiral Christos Nunes, wrote that the ship made an emergency docking in 1980 because the captain had a serious illness that he needed to address. Numerous things went wrong from there. The ship began having engine problems and the crew ran into financial and insurance issues. Then, the entire crew was fired. The Dimitrios continued to deteriorate over the next several months. Water seeped into the hull, causing it to list. Authorities declared that the vessel was dangerous and asked its owners to move it, but the owners didn't respond for several months, and thanks to bad weather, the ship became stranded at its current site. There were no attempts to salvage the wreck. Number 8. Prora. It's hard to envision Adolf Hitler as the type of person who believed in leisure time, right? But he did, for certain people at least. And his idea of what vacation looked like was about as bleak as someone would imagine it to be. During the late 1930s, he had 8 identical buildings constructed along the shore of Germany's Rügen Island. Known as Prora, the complex was meant to be a resort spanning 3 miles along the shoreline. According to the plans, all of the rooms would have a view of the sea, while staircases, hallways, and other amenities would be on the land-facing sides of the buildings. Each room would have a few beds, a sink, and an armoire, and there would be several shared bathrooms on each floor. The no-frills resort was meant to be efficient and cost-friendly so that average German workers could afford to spend their time off there. Prora was one of several vacation sites that the Nazi leisure organization planned through its efforts to provide people with places to go on holiday. Hitler also had secret plans to use these sites as fallback military installations if the need ever arose. But the dictator's vision never came to fruition. All construction stopped at the beginning of World War II in 1939, and the 10,000 rooms at Prora were left empty and unfinished. The property was used for housing refugees and then as an elderly housing complex, but has sat abandoned since the 90s. Number 7. Campanopolis. Outside the Argentinian capital of Buenos Aires, there's a whimsical, Willy Wonka-like collection of buildings known as Campanopolis. At first, it looks like it could be an abandoned village, but when you take a closer look, you'll realize that the cartoon-like, distorted structures are empty, and that they were probably never lived in. The fantastical site is the brainchild of an eccentric millionaire named Antonio Campana. He bought the land with the intention of farming it right before Argentina entered a dismal period of dictatorship and oppression. Antonio's land was taken from him and used as a dump, and his dream of diversifying his income by becoming a farmer came to an abrupt halt. But he wasn't about to give up without a fight. Determined to recover his land, Antonio quit his job and challenged the government. Surprisingly, he won. And after clearing 70 million cubic feet of garbage, he realized that the land was ruined. It was useless for farming. And by then, the aging businessman had been diagnosed with cancer and was told he only had a handful of years left to live. Using some of the junk that the government left behind for him to clean and other rubbish he found in Buenos Aires, Antonio built Campanopolis. He began construction on his personal wonderland in the early 80s, putting it together piece by piece over the course of several years. He planted trees, bringing wildlife back to the barren 500-acre plot that had been turned over to him. Antonio outlived his life expectancy by 25 years, and his Dr. Seuss-like town continued to grow. Today, Campanopolis is open to curious visitors who want to get a glimpse into the mind of Antonio Campana and celebrate his message of renewability that was so far ahead of his time. Number 6. Little Pioneers Youth Camp. Communist-era European architecture has a distinct look to it that could perhaps best be described as paradoxically futuristic and vintage. One good example of this outdated space-age look can be found at a children's camp in Doiran Lake in North Macedonia. Known as Tito's Pioneers or the Little Pioneers Youth Camp, it was built as part of a self-governing system of communities who decided how to spend the money they obtained as they saw fit. This is just one of the many publicly funded building projects that were completed during Yugoslavia's communist era from 1945 to 1992. The lakeside camp was one of 5 resorts dedicated to children that operated in Yugoslavia's Socialist Federal Republic of Macedonia. Occupying a roughly 4 square mile area, the Little Pioneers Youth Camp welcomed kids from all over Yugoslavia. Children could stay in the 5 arrow-shaped avant-garde buildings with their circular-shaped windows and basic concrete exteriors free of charge. At its height, around 300 locals were employed at the camp. The complex was abandoned in the 1990s during the Yugoslav wars. Nearby residents are said to reflect fondly upon the days when the drab, seemingly post-apocalyptic buildings were filled with kids, remembering that period of time as the golden era. It's easy to access the site, but it's also reportedly dangerous. Everything inside the buildings has already been looted, leaving just the structures themselves, complete with broken windows, standing as mere shells of what they were during their glory days. Are you brave enough to visit the Little Pioneers Youth Camp? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Bonanza. The town of Bonanza was settled in Idaho's Yankee Fork region in 1877 by a man from Bodie, California named Charles Franklin. Ambitious gold miners flocked to the new settlement, where Franklin sold plots of land for anywhere from $40 to $300. By 1881, there were at least 600 people living in Bonanza. The town boasted a dentist, tin shop, watchmaker, a baseball field, and even its own newspaper, the Yankee Fork Herald. And of course, there was a saloon, because no American Western town was complete without at least one. But Bonanza's golden era came to a screeching halt in 1889, when a fire burned up most of the town. People moved to other nearby towns, and there were just 136 residents left the following year. By 1910, the settlement was abandoned entirely. In addition to the fire wreaking havoc on Bonanza and the allure of other up-and-coming towns drawing residents away, Charles Franklin was suspected of shooting a couple to death because the wife had rejected his advances and married someone else. He then fled and never returned. And I think it's safe to say that the stunt wasn't exactly a good PR move for Bonanza, which was already dealing with the effects of a dwindling population. A handful of the town structures remain standing today, in various states of preservation and decay, along with the headstones of the newlywed couple that Franklin allegedly murdered. Number 4. The Wemul Project. In the wake of World War II during the early 1950s, the Argentine government collaborated with Austrian-born scientist Ronald Richter to develop something called the thermotron. It was based on Richter's plans to use nuclear fusion to generate energy. Just years earlier, President Juan Perón had purged the country's universities. Over 1,000 professors either quit or were fired, leaving Argentina at a major disadvantage compared to other nations when it came to science and academia in general. So it makes sense that Richter had a relatively easy time pitching his idea to Perón. An experimental site was built on Wemul Island near the Andes in the Patagonia region. Tests began as early as 1951. That same year, Richter found possible evidence that he had successfully achieved fusion. Peron eagerly announced this as a definite fact, further stating that the energy would eventually be sold cheaply or perhaps even given away in milk bottle-sized containers. Scientists all over the world were immediately skeptical of Richter's alleged achievement. There were no papers published on the matter, and several people who visited Wemul Island in an attempt to learn more were denied access to the test site. A scientific team was commissioned to investigate Richter's claims, which they ultimately deemed untrue. The project was cancelled in 1952, barely a year after it started. Access to Wemul Island remained restricted until the 1970s, when the military began using it for target practice. Tours of the test site's ruins have been available to visitors since 1995, although the exact details of what went on there remain largely a mystery to this day. Number 3. Yukivok. King Island is a small Alaskan island located roughly 90 miles northwest of Nome in the Bering Sea. It's just 1 mile wide and is steeply sloped on all sides. The desolate island is home to what was once the village of Yukivok, where a group of seafaring Inupiat population once spent their winters. Given the nature of its landscape, it wasn't exactly an easy place to build or live. But this group of people, who called themselves the Asaluk or Yukivokmit, managed to build huts near the shoreline by propping them up on stilts. During the summer, the Asaluk survived mainly by fishing and whaling. The winters came with thick ice, so they took shelter at Yukivok and subsisted on crabs, seals, and other animals. They stopped using Yukivok during the mid-20th century when the Bureau of Indian Affairs closed the village's school, requiring children to remain on the mainland year-round. Without their help with the winter food supply, it became too much work to gather food during the winters at Yukivok. Left with no other choice, the entire population migrated to mainland Alaska and began living there full-time. More than 50 years later, their stilt village still stands, as if it's somehow waiting for them to return. In recent years, original members of Yukivok have been allowed to return to ensure the preservation of the settlement they had no other choice than to leave behind. Number 2. Ponti City Apartments. In the 1970s, South Africa operated under a rigid policy of racial segregation called apartheid. A circular concrete apartment complex called Ponti City was built in Johannesburg with enough housing for 3,500 of the city's affluent white residents. The 567-foot-tall, 55-floor building was in a more progressive-thinking neighborhood, where some nightclubs and bars had licenses allowing for a racially mixed customer base, and landlords soon discovered that it was easy to rent to black tenants and take advantage of the fact that they were living in the building illegally. It meant that they would pay their rent to make sure they didn't get kicked out, while not complaining to the authorities about anything wrong with their apartment that the landlord was slow to fix. When the authorities found out that Ponti City was unlawfully renting apartments to black residents, they cut the building's electric, running water, and other services. This triggered white flight, meaning that the white residents moved away. Soon enough, there were some 10,000 people squatting at Ponti City. A 5-story rubbish heap accumulated in the courtyard, and the building rapidly deteriorated as it became infamous for the number of suicides that occurred there. It also became overrun with drug dealers, pimps, and other criminals, along with people who were down on their luck, struggling with addiction and other issues, and simply had nowhere else to live. Finally, the owners decided to clean the property up. Unable to get heavy machinery into the courtyard, they had to sift through the garbage pile by hand, and reportedly found 23 dead bodies in the process of cleaning it. Sadly, all the deaths appear to be suicides and gang murders. Slowly but surely, the apartments at Ponti City are being cleaned up, renovated, and reoccupied. This time, legally. But it's taken decades of restoration to get the building even partially back to its former glory, and it may never regain its status as a luxurious living space. Number 1. Ryugong Hotel. In the North Korean capital of Pyongyang, a pyramid-shaped concrete structure tops the skyline, standing at 1,080 feet tall. The 105-story structure holds the Guinness record as the world's tallest unoccupied building. Construction on the Ryugong Hotel began in 1987, with plans to fill it with 3,000 rooms. But after the Soviet Union collapsed, North Korea fell into an economic crisis. Building stopped in 1992. The windowless, partially finished structure fell into decay as it sat for over a decade, with a rusting crane outside. The European Chamber of Commerce inspected the hotel during the late 90s and deemed it irreparable. In addition to noticing crooked elevator shafts, the committee expressed concerns regarding the quality of the building material. The Ryugong Hotel earned a reputation as the worst building in the world, as the Hermit Kingdom went out of its way to eliminate the eyesore from images of the Pyongyang skyline. Soon enough, the media dubbed it the Hotel of Doom and the Phantom Hotel. Nevertheless, construction resumed in 2008. North Korean officials announced that the building would be finished in 2012, and they set an opening date for the following year. But these plans weren't in place long before they were suspended yet again in 2013. 5 years later, an LED display was added to the building's exterior. Not surprisingly, it's used for displaying political propaganda. A hotel sign and logo appeared in 2019. Nobody knows whether the Ryugong Hotel will ever be finished or if it'll ever open for guests. There are still rumors swirling that the building is structurally unsound, and the most recent photos of the interior show that it was still bare in 2012. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn about more shocking abandoned discoveries, let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe. Bye for now.